Hi, A&Pers. This is Dr. Jones checking in. We are doing A&P 1, Lab 4, Video 2. So we're talking about the anatomy of the brain now. So let's talk about some major brain regions. Starting with the brain stem. Brain stem goes from here to here, and it has three parts: the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. So here, the main part of the brain is the cerebrum. This is what I call the thinky part. It does your higher brain functions. The diencephalon is this region here, and we're learning two of the subregions in lab. The thalamus is this round part that looks like an eyeball. It includes that gold spot. We'll learn the name for that, but we're doing the whole thalamus right now. And then this snout here is the hypothalamus. So some people maintain that you can see a seahorse here, that this thalamus is the eye of the seahorse. Hypothalamus is the snout of the seahorse. The midbrain here, also called the mesencephalon, is the neck of the seahorse, and the pregnant belly is the pons, and the tail here will be the medulla oblongata. So if the seahorse has a pregnant belly, is it male or female? It's male, because male seahorses carry the babies. So here behind the seahorse is the cerebellum. Now be very careful here, because these two parts, the cerebrum and the cerebellum, the words look alike, they sound a lot alike, they spell a lot alike. But this is the cerebrum, C-E-R-E-B-R-U-M, and this is the cerebellum, C-E-R-E-B-E-L-L-U-M. So cerebrum, cerebellum. So let's review that. Cerebrum, cerebellum, cerebrum, cerebellum, cerebrum, cerebellum. One more. Cerebrum, cerebellum. This becomes, I make a point of it because this becomes very important, because we're going to use these words in their adjective form, and then it gets even worse, because these are going to be the two cerebral hemispheres and the two cerebellar hemispheres. So we're going to use cerebrum and cerebellum a number of times, and from here on out, I'm going to assume you know what I'm talking about. So a review of the brain regions. This whole part here is the brain stem. This is the cerebrum. This major region here, the whole shebang, is the diencephalon, the whole eyeball, thalamus, snout, hypothalamus, the neck, midbrain or mesencephalon, pregnant belly, pons, tail, medulla oblongata, and cerebellum. Excellent. So the gray matter is made of unmyelinated axons, and the cerebral cortex is the outer rind of the brain. It actually shows a little better when we can cut the brain. You can see the cerebral cortex is this kind of pink layer. You see how it folds in, like sometimes you get an orange where the rind kind of folds in like a navel orange? It's still rind though, and that's what this is. This is the cerebral cortex. It's the outer edge, just like if you're looking at the outside of an orange, you're looking at the rind. If you're looking at the outside of the brain, you're looking at the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex is one of the places that we find gray matter in the brain. And gray matter is made of cell bodies, the somas, the dendrites, and unmyelinated axons. And you see these white stripes deep to the gray matter of the cerebral cortex. This is white matter. White matter is made of myelinated axons. You can also see white matter here in the hemisphere section of the brain. We'll learn this is the corpus callosum, but right now you can see it's painted white because this is white matter, along with the eyebrow here, which we'll learn is the fornix, is also white matter. And white matter is made of myelinated axons. So the cerebral hemisphere we already mentioned are the two halves of the cerebrum. The longitudinal fissure is what we call the crack between the two cerebral hemispheres. So we're not going to call it a brain crack. We're calling it the longitudinal fissure. Longitudinal fissure. Cerebral cortex, as we said, is the outer rind, which you can kind of see better when it's cut. So there you go. That pink layer. And the gyrus is each of these raised folds. The brain is folded up so that you'll have enough space inside your skull for all of these neurons. So each raised fold is a gyrus. And then the indents in between, each indent is a sulcus. So raised fold gyrus, and the indent in between those gyri is a sulcus. Okay, let's talk about the meninges, the coverings of the brain. The superficial layer here is the dura mater, and the dura mater, like toe mater without a toe, it's M-A-T-E-R. The dura mater does surround and completely go around the whole brain and even the length of the spinal cord, which we don't have on this model. It's cut here like a mohawk just so you can see the other two layers underneath it. So this is the dura mater, and the dura mater makes folds, and in the folds sometimes we see a vein. This vein here is the superior sagittal sinus. And if we pull this out, you can also see here this blue line is the superior sagittal sinus. Now when we did the bones, the skeleton, we learned a sinus was a hole in the bone normally filled with air. And now we have our second definition for the word sinus. This is a type of vein. It's kind of a large vein. So this one is superior, it is mid-sagittal, and it is a vein. So superior sagittal sinus. Deep to the dura mater is the middle meningeal layer. There are 3 meningeal layers. And this is the arachnoid mater, and this is a white shiny layer. And you can see that there are blood vessels deep to the arachnoid mater. They will be in the subarachnoid space. And the third and deepest layer will be the pia mater. The pia mater ends up being a simple squamous epithelium that effectively looks like the surface of the brain. If you get a chance to dissect a sheep brain, then you can look for that. Okay, here's our other meningeal model. The one I like to call Mr. Creepy Head. Yeah. Okay, so from the side we can see that we've got skull here. You can see the sagittal suture, coronal suture. And this will be your superior sagittal sinus, that blue line there. And this fold of dura mater is called the falx cerebri, F-A-L-X-C-E-R-E-B-R-I. The falx cerebri lives in the longitudinal fissure, and we can see that on this model. The falx cerebri, you've got the longitudinal fissure. The falx cerebri lives in the longitudinal fissure. Incidentally, that would be the inferior sagittal sinus. So the falx cerebri separates the cerebral hemispheres. Next on our list, we have the Tentorium Cerebelli. The Tentorium Cerebelli acts as a tent over the cerebellum. I'm going to grab a cerebellum here for a second. Okay, so here's the cerebellum. So it acts as a tent over the cerebellum. Upside down, there we go. So the Tentorium Cerebelli separates the cerebrum. Let's get a smaller cerebrum. Cerebrum from the cerebellum. Tentorium cerebelli acts as a tent over the cerebellum, separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum. And what separates the cerebral hemispheres? The falx cerebri. Our last term in here is the falx cerebelli. So the falx cerebelli separates the cerebellar hemispheres, like that. So falx cerebelli separates the cerebellar hemispheres. Okay, we also need to cover the arachnoid granulations. So coming back to this model, you see those white dots? So the fluid in and around the brain is called cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. And your brain is constantly making, well, not your brain, but your body's constantly making CSF, which means you constantly have to drain off CSF into the veins. So all the blood in the veins is called the venous circulation. So the arachnoid granulations are going to be all these white dots, and you can see them on the arachnoid mater, and you can see them, they come through into the superior sagittal sinus. And they drain excess fluid out of the CSF. They filter wastes out into this venous circulation so that those can all go back into the bloodstream. Because since you're constantly making CSF and the brain case, the cranium is an enclosed space, if you don't constantly drain it off, then you would have too much pressure inside the brain. Okay, so that has been A&P 1 Lab 4, Video 2. The education must go on. Dr. J out.